All right, thanks everybody for joining. We're about to waiting for just one more minute, but wanted to get the recording started and then also give a brief sort of intro to what this is. We are doing this workshop in honor of Martin Luther King Day. For us at HFA, it's a day of service because MLK did believe that economic justice was part of the struggle for racial justice. And we just finished a webinar around a biography of his that's coming out and sort of the relevance to today. So I'm sure that webinar will be available online after today. And we wanted to add some content around our advocacy and community organizing department and how we operate today. And so to start with introductions, I'll pass it to you, Dawn. You're muted.
I'm always muted. So thank you, Emilio. My name is Dawn Pierce, and I am the National Community Organizing Manager for Hunger Free America. My background actually is in nursing. I have been a nurse for going on 33 years now, and my lived experience with hunger and poverty and being a hunger and poverty survivor myself kind of like led me down this path and has found me at Hunger Free America. And I have been with the organization since October of last year. And we are very glad that you're here. Emilio?
Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide. My name's Emilio Tavares, and I'm the Policy Director for Hunger Free America. I manage our policy advocacy as well as some qualitative research and also our community organizing. So a lot of different projects, and glad to have Dawn aboard. My background is in social work, so I have a lot of experience helping people directly apply for a variety of benefits here in New York City. I am also an immigrant and I have lived experience of poverty myself. And I think both Dawn and I work well together since we're different places, parts of the country, and also different demographics, if you hadn't noticed. So we are a good team on sort of like diverse messaging and engagement with different communities. And we're excited to just teach you a little bit of what we know, what we've learned just through this work. Next. And so to give a little more of background on what you can expect from this presentation, we'd love everybody to introduce yourselves in the chat if you'd like. It's great for us to know what parts of the country are represented and sort of gives us a sense of what it used to be like in person. And then this is the table of contents for the presentation. I'll do a little bit of background on national hunger right now. We do an annual report every year around the fall, like November, Thanksgiving time. Then Dawn and I will cover different messaging for different states. So she'll start with, what she's learned in Idaho and what I've learned and then we'll move into what I've learned in New York City. I think it's important to also ground this in history. Like I said, MLK's legacy continues to this day, and that's what we try to do. Not yet, if we could go back. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about the history of SNAP and sort of the safety net, as well as some recent victories from, advocates. And before we get into our sort of day-to-day, like how you can help us, like part of this is also, we need as many volunteers and as many advocates across the country to take on this message and keep up the fight. Because if it's just up to Dawn and I by ourselves, that's going to be a long time coming. So that's it for the introduction, and I'll just launch into sort of introducing Hunger Free America. I'll go to the next one. And so we're a national nonprofit that's based in New York City, and we do both direct service and advocacy. So we're an interesting organization because we are so complicated in terms of like national, but also local, but direct service and advocacy. And part of what makes our advocacy effective is that we do direct services in the form of SNAP and WIC enrollment. SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance or the modern day food stamps. And WIC is the special program for women's, infants, and children, which is a nutritional program that people that are pregnant and children under 5 can receive. And so we believe that to end hunger, we really need higher wages and a stronger safety net. That's the true end to hunger. Food distribution programs do a lot of vital work filling in the gaps. but they can't end hunger on their own. We keep putting money into food distribution and the problem keeps getting worse. So we really need structural, comprehensive solutions. And the government is, the biggest system that can really take that on. That's what we pay taxes for. That's what funds those programs. And so we should feel entitled to make those programs better. And so we also have national programming in the form of the USDA Hunger Hotline. So anybody across the country can give us a call and we'll connect them to hunger resources in their area. And then we also, have a National AmeriCorps Vista program where we place volunteers in strategic locations to help with anti-hunger initiatives. So I know that was a lot. Moving on to the next slide, talking more specifically about the report. I'll put that in the chat. And then this is the cover for the last iteration that came out in November. And I appreciate the introductions in the chat. I see people from the Bronx, Idaho. Thank you for coming. Pittsburgh as well. We love to see it. And so I put the link to the report in the chat. And basically we use census data and some other data, some different types of surveys to come up with some of these metrics. But basically we calculated that between October 2021 and October 2022, food insecurity went from close to 20 million people to now 25 million people nationwide. That's a substantial increase. And our sort of what we think is the cause of that is sort of the expiration of a lot of the pandemic era improvements to the safety net. The expiration of the child tax credit. We no longer have universal school meals nationwide. Now it depends on whether students go to public school or private school. Did they fill out the forms on time? Do they have enough money to pay? And so that doesn't help students learn. And then not only that, but also the impact of inflation on the economy. There's like learning loss that we're still dealing with. So there's a lot of different issues that we feel is all related to why hunger is going up. So we feel like every state and every local agency has a role to play in this fight, especially with the way Congress is going. It's really important for local governments, city and local states to do their part and implement some of these things more permanently, because we all saw that hunger went down, kids were fed. And so that's what the report is about. It has a lot of recommendations around what we'd like to see to improve these programs. And I will leave it at that. I think part of what I'll also say is we have a separate report that's more qualitative. That's more about the lived experience people have with these programs and how much they felt that it helped them. So I'll drop that link in the chat also, and then I'll, because we like to combine the numbers with the personal stories, that's sort of our main strategy. And I will move on to Dawn and let her talk about how she does that in Idaho.
So hunger, being in a conservative state, hunger, our elected representatives kind of don't like to talk about it. They like to talk about how much money in the rainy day fund that they have and how much money they're saving, but what they're not doing is they're not spending it, and they're not spending it on the people who need it the most. Representative Jim McGovern says, "I've always said that hunger is a political condition. We have the resources and we know what it takes. We just have to muster the will to end it." And this is not always the case in states like Idaho, Utah, Montana, Texas, and Wyoming. In more conservative states, we have to be able to talk about ending hunger, helping those who need it, all while talking about fiscal responsibility and personal responsibility and people pulling themselves up by the bootstraps. And it's like walking a fine line and like walking a tightrope. In red states, members of Congress, state and city officials are looking at how does hunger affect the economy, budgets, healthcare, the bottom line, and how much do we have to spend on it. What I have here is hunger in Idaho from October 21 to October 22, Florida and Texas. And interestingly enough, Texas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas are the top 5 states with hunger, and those are all red states. A lot of politicians will say, stop the handouts and stop creating welfare queens. Is SNAP a way of life? And there's too much, and how about all that fraud? So how does hunger affect the economy, the budgets, and healthcare? And it affects it very badly. The annual cost of food insecurity is about $130 billion a year due to illness related to hunger and food insecurity. The cost of poor educational outcomes and lower lifetime earnings linked to hunger and food insecurity is $19 billion. Fact, SNAP benefits spent on eligible households by eligible households generate an annual increase in rural and urban communities of about $48 billion and $149 billion for a collective total about $198 billion collectively. And that's far beyond the $130.5 billion due to the cost of illnesses related to hunger and food insecurity. So the cost of people being on SNAP is far better, and it actually helps the economy more than people not being on SNAP and being sick or tired or not working or not going to school and not living up to their potential and earning what they should be earning. Stop handouts and creating welfare queens. Well, the welfare queen myth was a racist fable that reinforced some of the ugliest stereotypes about Black and poor people. Countless Americans suffered because they couldn't get the help they needed. Is SNAP a way of life? People think that elected officials, more conservative ones, feel that people are just sitting around having babies, collecting benefits and eating bonbons all day. And wouldn't that be great if we could just do that? But no, I honestly don't know a single SNAP recipient that loves being on SNAP because it's just the best. SNAP recipients would much rather be self-sufficient and having the money to buy whatever they want to buy and not saying, oh, should I, here's apples and here's Hot Pockets, which one costs less, and having to make that decision. And then you have the statement of there's so much fraud in the system that's just wrought with fraud. And the bottom line is the SNAP program is designed to automatically expand in times of recession, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The fraud in the SNAP program is less than 1% in Idaho. And I believe it's every quarter that the USDA gives out bonus money to the states who very effectively manage and implement their SNAP programs, and with the least amount of fraud, I guess, for lack of a better word. And they get bonus money from the USDA for doing this. And Idaho has received quarterly bonus money for the last several years, since I know of 2012. And the money that they get from the USDA actually goes into the general fund. Higher SNAP spending provides fiscal stimulus to the economy. SNAP spending is projected to decline over the next several years as the economy gets better. Of course, SNAP's going to go down. SNAP reduces food insecurity, particularly among vulnerable populations. SNAP benefits are a key support for families and most importantly, working families. Most people receiving SNAP are the working poor. SNAP's expansion in times of economic downturn is not a flaw in the program design, but a key element of its success in supporting families and stimulating the economy during hard times. More people on SNAP when the economy is terrible, whereby stimulating the economy. So it's kind of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And nationally, 11% of Americans were found to live in food insecure households between 2019 and 2021. And according to the USDA, the states with the highest rates of food insecure individuals from 19 to 21 were Texas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas, all red states. And interestingly enough, the 5 states with the lowest food insecurity during that same time, 19 to 21, Iowa, which is more of a purple state, Rhode Island, blue state, Minnesota, blue state, Virginia, blue state, New Hampshire, purple state. And the reason they embrace that people need help they embrace that people need services and they're available for them. And I believe that's why the states with the lowest food insecurity rates are blue and purple states. Emilio?
Yeah, and so you see why in red states there is that like, fiscal conservative framing, right? Like Dawn went over a lot of numbers, a lot of percentages. And so I think that's the difference in the approach. In red states, that's really what they want to know. Is it going to save money? Is it going to cut bureaucracy? Is it going to cut red tape, right? Like, can we get people off SNAP? Can we put work requirements? Like sometimes they don't want to make improvements because they want to make it hard for people to get these benefits. There's like a shame and stigma that's built into this program. So it's like, oh, you want assistance? Well, you got to go through all these hoops and feel terrible about yourself because you should, right? Like you should be able to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and that's not framing that we support whatsoever. And some of these are the ways that we try to convince people to great
You need
success.
to have boots to have them bootstraps.
That's a good one. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the relationships and successes you've had in Idaho?
Successes in Idaho. I can tell you about successes that I've had with my members of Congress. Jim Risch, over the last probably 9 years, he's kind of stingy with the money. It used to be the first thing he would ask us, how much is this going to cost in appropriations? To where when I met with him last year in June, he didn't even ask about appropriations. He just says, let's get these people fed. People can't eat transportation costs. We need to cut those transportation costs so people have more money, so we can have more money for people to spend on their food. So Jim Risch was actually an original co-sponsor for the Global Food Security Act. He was an original co-sponsor for the Global Malnutrition and Prevention Act. I had a meeting with his ag staffer here in Boise, and we had like an hour-and-a-half meeting, and it was great. But one thing he mentioned was universal school meals. I thought that's pretty interesting. And then Joel, myself, and Emilio had a meeting with Jim Risch's staff in DC, a Zoom meeting, and one of his staffers mentioned that the senator was very, very interested in looking into universal free school meals. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a win. So that's an up and coming win. But
just to highlight, that's exactly what I wanted. Like it took 9 years to help cultivate that relationship to the point where, he has a better framing, is more interested in these sorts of fixes. So I just wanted to highlight, I think that was great. And I think there's a question in the chat. Also, feel free everybody to send in questions as well. We're happy to answer throughout because it's complicated and there's a lot of nuances. So Hannah, you wanted to know if there's less money spent on SNAP, does that mean that there's more money saved into the state's general fund? Dawn, do you want to answer first?
Can you kind of clarify that a little bit?
Well,
so the more the program is run efficiently, I don't believe the bonus money goes up and down with the amount of fraud or people on SNAP or anything. It's just if your questionable rates, I guess, fraud rates are below a certain percentage, then and your program, and they have a criteria on how what they consider effectively run, then the states do receive that bonus money. And the amount doesn't fluctuate.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, to clarify too, SNAP is a federal program. So it's federal dollars that are spent on it, and the USDA is the federal agency that runs it. So USDA stands for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And basically, SNAP is an entitlement, which means that its budget expands with need based on how many people are eligible. So anybody who's eligible can get it, but the more people who are eligible and apply, the more federal dollars are being spent on the program. So I think it's just more of like a philosophy that lawmakers have, like, oh, let's keep the like enrollment low so that we don't spend so much on the program, rather than oh, that many people need it, we need to do more, like make it easier, increase the benefits, right? Like it's just like I wish they would go the opposite way, like let's do more. And I think also the states do some SNAP outreach and other sorts of things. So I think the states do sometimes reduce their outreach and say, oh, we just need to save money. So for example, in New York, to transition over to the blue states conversation, in New York, the comptroller, who is the fiscal sort of reporter of the state, basically said that New York State is about to see a surplus, but that we should see of like billions of dollars, but that we should save most of it because people project a recession. And I think, from my own point of view, it's that they should spend more money because people need it now rather than trying to save it for an emergency that's coming. I feel like not doing more now is just going to make that next emergency worse or like faster. And so to talk a little bit about, some of the different challenges that I face, Idaho, it's a lot of the fiscal responsibility piece. I think thankfully, at least in New York, I think the moral argument and more like value-based arguments are effective. So talking about children that are going hungry, talking about like marginalized populations, right? Like, Black, Latino, Asian communities that are not getting sufficient support. There's inflation happening, right? Like rising costs. So I don't have to do as much of, financial analysis, which are really hard to do. Like it's really hard to know how effective or like, how much money are we saving by making it easier for people to apply for SNAP. That's ultimately what we want, is for programs to be easier, right? I think in New York, the bigger issue is that people think of New York State as New York City. And I think there's a lot of rural communities upstate. There's actually a lot of farms in New York State that face a lot of food insecurity. And the cities get more attention because there's more concentrated poverty. And though there tend to be like higher wages, New York State is about to have like, it does have $15 minimum wage in New York City, and it's about to be like 14 something throughout the entire state. It's been like a phase-in process. So that's great. And then there are more programs around like, childcare assistance and housing assistance, right? Like there might be more programs than in Idaho per se, but there are still a lot of barriers around the application process. So like, let's say I'm a parent and I have 2 kids and I need childcare, I need food assistance, and I need housing assistance. I have to go to 3 different offices to do my application, talk to 3 different people that are going to basically ask me the same information about my income, my household size, who lives with me, what's my address, right? Like, so all this scrutiny, and I have to go through it multiple times. Not only that, I'm sort of wasting time that I could be working. The majority of people that are on SNAP and that, use safety net programs work, people think that they're just like laying around, but most of them work. They're just not working jobs that pay enough. And if you have to spend all this time applying for these programs, that impacts your ability to work, right? Like I have 2 kids, I need childcare for, so I can't work until I get the childcare, but then going through the application process for that is going to take days that are also going to prevent me from working. So even though, the mentality from some politicians might be like, we just want people to get to work, they miss the point that these programs would help people go to work, right? Like nobody wants to be in a social service office telling their trauma and struggles to a caseworker. I've been the caseworker, hearing the stories, and I'm a trained social worker, so my responses tend to be very helpful. I have tons of resources, referrals, just like off the top of my head, like, oh, you want a career in social services? Here's a training program. But then ultimately I would have to say, like, you need other services that I can't provide in this one visit. And I can't tell you how many people were distressed by that. Like, I just, their typical response would be like, I just told you my life story and my struggles. Like, why do I have to go to a new person and basically tell them everything again? So just having to tell their story to multiple strangers, some who may not be as empathetic as me, is a barrier in itself. So it's not just the financial and time costs that the current system has, but it's also that emotional toll that deters people, the shame and the stigma of like, I'm not that person, like I need a little help, but I don't need, I'm not, you know, that poor person that has been villainized and criminalized. Because that's sort of what the programs sometimes do. Is like there used to be fingerprinting in some of these that we've advocated to remove because it didn't make people feel like they were criminals registering for something bad. And so, you know, a lot of so you see, like my arguments are more around values, right? Like poor people shouldn't have to struggle, like families shouldn't go hungry, right? Children can't learn if they don't have food in their bellies, right? A state legislator recently made a great comparison in support of universal school meals that, you know, you wouldn't ride a car that has no gas. So like same way, like a student can't learn without food in their belly, that's their fuel. And so you see here some of the numbers around like food insecurity in New York State, like it's still over 1 million people, many of them children. So that's a lot of people. In California, it's another, you know, quote unquote progressive state, but they have over 3 million people that are facing food insecurity. So, you know, hunger is in every state. There's a lot of improvements that can be done in every part of the country. And we've developed our philosophy and our theory of change from doing this work. Like I've been a social worker doing casework for like over a decade. Dawn has been a nurse for 30 years. You know, our CEO, Joe Berg, has been in the anti-hunger fight for like over 20 years. So that's sort of the historic line of how we continue to do this work. Like there's a lot of young people that have like fresh creative ideas on how things should be. And so we need you all to work. We all need to work together. Every generation, every demographic. There's a lot of work that needs to happen. And so to just give a little bit more history details, I'll go to the next slide. So in 1961, this is when, around the time that the first White House Conference on Hunger happened. As Dawn mentioned, we just had the second one ever, so that it was like 40 or 50 years in the making. And the first White House conference led to a lot of the programs that we've spoken about today. Like SNAP and WIC are a direct result of that first conference. And this is sort of what it looked like back in when the presidential candidates were really seeing the poverty and malnutrition. Another thing about this, I think, that's worth mentioning is back then there was no media. There was no social media. You know, I think radio was probably like the most accessible thing. And so like words can't describe this level of poverty, right? Like you need to see it to believe it to some extent. And I think that's one way that we have progressed is like there is more visibility at least of the struggle. I'll go to the next one. This is what the old coupons were, like food stamps were actual stamps. No, you can keep going, that's okay. Because this is actually where I wanted to go. No, sorry, one behind. Oh, I think there's a delay, sorry about that. But just to say that like in the 80s is when we moved away from stamps into the benefit card. So now people that apply for SNAP just get a benefit card in the mail that it's called an electronic benefit transfer card. EBT is short for that. And you'll see signs now around, like if you look around in bodegas or supermarkets, you'll see these signs still that, you know, we accept EBT, we accept SNAP, like there are stores promoting. That's where the private sector comes in, that every store that sells food should be able to process SNAP transactions. And now the push is like, can people use these benefits online? Right, like we have debit cards that you can move money around easily. You can buy stuff online easily. So that's the stuff that we are pushing for. Next slide. And then as early as 2022 is where the EBT cards went nationwide. It was a phase-in process. But 2022 was, I'm sorry, 2002, my bad, was not that long ago, right? Like that was only 20 years ago. I was 10 years old in 2001. So I feel like that's within my lifetime, there's been a lot of improvements in the programs. Dawn, do you want to add any perspective on that?
I can add like EBT card perspective from Idaho. They are pretty quick. They will hand you an EBT card the day you go apply if you qualify. So, I mean, they're pretty quick on it for that. I remember the old food stamp, the paper money, my children called them at one time. But I remember when I worked at a convenience store, you probably called them bodegas, but I worked at a convenience store, and kids would come in with like, $1, and they'd buy like 5 cents in candy. And I'm thinking, what are they doing? And I give them their change. Well, mom needed to do laundry. And so they would come, and then they would take the change, give it to mom, and mom would go do laundry. And so that was kind of like my first introduction. I was maybe 20. That was like my first introduction. And then, the state now just gives you your card right then and there when you qualify.
Thank you. In New York, you have to like get it in the mail, so that may take a week or more. So there's also differences in how each state operates. We'd love to see a more standardized programs across the board.
I would think that there was a little mom and pop store in town, and it's not even there anymore, but there was rumors that they would buy your food stamp, your paper food stamps, 50 cents on the dollar. And I knew of people who would go and sell them so they could buy things like toilet paper and diapers, because that's not part of your benefit, or money for like laundry.
And there's a lot of improvement. So, and that's the thing, because SNAP can only buy food, there are still a lot of other programs that may not exist, right? Like in New York, there is programming for those services that maybe don't exist in other parts. So again, just, yes, as in the chat, right, like trying to give some examples of the progress that's been made, because I'm glad that we don't have to use, the coupon books anymore. We can go to the next slide. And so that's more specific. Those were specific to SNAP, right? But I also wanted to touch on some more broad improvements. So like I mentioned, the last White House Conference on Nutrition, Hunger, and Health happened last fall. And so Hunger Free America, John and I, we got to meet in person, and that we did a lot of work with Congressman McGovern from Massachusetts and the White House to make sure that poverty reduction was part of the national strategy that they came up with and committed to. And we continue to engage with them to make sure that every agency has people with lived experience, people like us, represented in their programming, or at least like consulted about changes and how they could continue to improve. The Affordable Care Act gave healthcare to millions more people. New York State has had a $50 minimum wage since 2016, at least in New York City. And then, as I said, New York State, Long Island, and Westchester, everything besides those three, New York City, Long Island, and Westchester, will have $14.20 an hour starting as of the end of December. We helped and pushed for removing fingerprinting from SNAP. That was done back in 2012 in New York State.
Idaho does not even do that, and I can't even wrap my head around that.
And this is the thing, is that people think that just because New York is seen as a progressive state doesn't mean that there aren't things like that. So there are Republicans up here, or conservative folks, that wanted fingerprinting, right? Like they want to reduce fraud. That's their idea. But even now, just as recently as 2019, fingerprinting has stopped in public assistance as well. So public assistance, it's like a different program that has food assistance as well as housing assistance combined. And so we were still fingerprinting for that program until 2019. That's only 4 years ago. So this is what I mean, that there's a lot of great stuff and a lot of improvements that we need in all of the states. And then recently, again, the American Rescue Plan was something the Biden administration passed that did invest like $12 billion into USDA. And so we've seen that come up as improvements, like the emergency allotments that were basically extra benefits people were getting through the pandemic. Those are set to end soon. So we're letting people know that, because that's going to directly impact millions of people starting at the end of February. But on the good side, there have been improvements to the Thrifty Food Plan, which is sort of the basis for how SNAP benefits are calculated. And then the pandemic EBT program has been expanded. Now there will be a permanent summer EBT program starting in like 2024.
Yep.
So there's more like both short-term wins, long-term wins, wins around hunger programs, wins around healthcare, like all of these things that reduce poverty and also reduce negative health outcomes are the things that we continue to push for. So that's a lot of theory and history. And so now we want to get into some activities. So do you want to get
I have pictures of pictures from the first White House conference in 1969. They had these also at the conference. But there's Nixon and Bob Dole, who I knew. And then George McGovern, and then of course Jim McGovern always says of no relation, of course. But this was huge. This set policy that we're still doing today, that we're still advocating for today.
Absolutely, and I think one note on that is the fun detail for me is that it was the first White House conference was done under President Nixon, who was Republican, and it was because there was such a robust like outside pressure from the media, from the people asking for him to do something about hunger. So I think that those are great pictures.
Bob Dole, Republican as well. And
so
then here's pictures from the conference that was in September.
And that's me with our Food Action Board, as well as some of our staff. We did a lot of days similar to this that we're doing for MLK. We did a lot of days of service and volunteer opportunities around the White House conference. We had our Food Action Board members, who are our community organizers, come with us. That's who you see in the picture with our shirts as well. And we wanted to make sure that people with lived experience, that our clients got to go and experience this historic moment. You can see there Congressman McGovern and on a panel, and some secretaries, members of the cabinet, the White House cabinet. So it was great to see how much engagement there was from every level of government, and we were excited to be a part of it. Do you want to kick this off?
So you think you can organize. So when I applied for this job, I was asked, do you even know what community organizing is? I said, well, of course I do, because when Obama was running for president, everybody always was talking about, oh, you're a community organizer and you think you can be president. Well, after doing community organizing, I am invincible and I think I can do anything now. So community organizing, it involves a lot of local outreach. It involves just talking to any and everybody you can who lives in or experiences what you want to get out more information. I think that's like the short definition. But what it is you gather a bunch of people up together that have the same kind of experiences, that have the same passion, who have basically the same kind of background, and you empower people to make change, to talk to their elected representatives, to create this momentum and to create this movement to make things better for everybody else in that community. Did I get it?
I'm just going to add to what you're saying. Yeah, I think it's about organizing people around a common plan, a common cause, right? Like if you all share a common experience around food insecurity, homelessness, whatever the issue is, what can we do about it collectively, right? Like the idea that we're all stronger together than each individual person. And so we, as like, I guess, professional organizers, we have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of strategies, tactics around what we can do if we have more people. So that's where we need to keep adding to our ranks so that we can carry out better or higher volume of things, right? Like if Dawn and I are the only two people emailing members of Congress, they're going to dismiss that. But if there's like hundreds of emails all with the same message, around the same issue, that gets people's attention, right? Even if it's just like, oh, now I'm annoyed, get off my back. Like that gets things done, right? It doesn't have to just be like, oh, yes, I believe in this. It's sort of like, okay, I just want to appease them. Like, I'll take it. That's a win.
So I'm old enough to remember that a commercial many years ago, and it was a shampoo commercial. And you tell a friend, and then the next little box is, and you tell a friend, and so on and so on and so on. And pretty soon the entire television screen was filled with little tiny boxes of people's faces. And that's what I think of now every time somebody talks about community organizing. It's you tell someone, and you tell someone, and so on and so on and so on. And pretty soon we have amassed this army of people who care, and people who want to make change for the better, and to make change not just better for themselves, but for an entire community, for their town, for their state, for their country.
And to talk a little bit more in depth about what we do, next slide, we have the Food Action Board, which is our community organizing program based in New York City. Dawn and I are working together to expand it to other parts of the country. And basically what we've done is just talk to our clients, identify where they want to push, like what time and energy they have, so that they can come to events like the White House Conference, so that they can go and speak on a panel that we want to host, or just come into a stakeholder meeting with the elected official. So we find a lot of our folks that are already leaders, right? Like people that are already serving on like volunteer positions, community boards, parent-teacher associations. Like these are people that are already feeling that need to speak up. And we need a lot more of those people. I think everybody has things that they would like to see different, but it's sort of getting that commitment and that motivation. And then also like people that are facing food insecurity, like they have so much stress, right? Like there's so much that they're already dealing with, that we try to be strategic with the initiatives that we engage them on. We don't want to overwhelm them with, activities or options, because we recognize that they are doing this in their spare time. So there's a balance that we want to strike there. Thankfully, the digital world has made it easier to engage with your members and to host events like this. But it's still, there's a lot of strategies that we take, and we hope to continue establishing groups like this all over the country. So again, to get a little bit more concrete, yeah, if you want to start, Dawn.
Yeah, so hand-holding and using or pushing your elected, representatives, using carrots and sticks. So I imagine somebody with a horse with the carrot and the stick saying, "Come on, let's go." But you can push your member, your elected representative, or you can handhold them. Pushing is like letters and emails to their office. Like once a week, you send an email to their office about your preferred issue, or letters to the editor. I know that in Boise, like letters to the editors every 30 days. Letters, you can handwrite a letter to their office, right? Once a week, put it on your calendar. Once a month, I'm going to send so-and-so a letter. That's more pushing. Publishing policy papers, letters to the editor, op-eds, that's mostly pushing. Jumping into a race and getting involved in parties, getting out the vote efforts, volunteering for a campaign who opposes somebody, that is mostly pushing. Types of hand-holding would be go to a town hall, sit quietly, listen to what your elected representative is saying, so you can get an idea of how you need to approach them from their point of view. If you're able to like visit them, and your group or whoever you're lobbying or advocating or with gives you a packet and says, these are your leave behinds. It typically has like one-page graphics or something. You can show them to whoever you're speaking with in the office and nicely explain it in a way that makes them think, makes them go, maybe we should try this, or answer their questions. But it's a very, very polite, very it's more passive. And then after a while, like calling and leaving messages after the pushing, if you email offices, write letters, or call often enough, you'll start to get to know the staff. And then eventually you can just call and say, oh, hey, yeah, do you remember me? My name is Dawn, and I called last week and I talked about this and this and this. I was just wondering what's going on with that. And eventually you develop this rapport with the office staff, and they'll kind of they'll give you a little insight on how that specific elected representative is voting or leaning, or did they get your letter or not. So that's more hand holding. It's the gentle passive, let's go this way instead. Instead of, I'm going to put your name in the media, dude.
I think that's the thing. It's sort of like, are we criticizing or are we sort of complimenting? Could be another way to think of it. You know, we can use letters and emails to criticize, like, oh, they're not doing this, or like, this is why the thing that you did is bad, right? So I think that's what I think of as sticks, is like sort of criticizing what they're doing, versus like what Donna also describes is like getting them to like you, you know, understanding their issue, like on a personal level. Like, organizing isn't just about organizing, you know, people impacted. It's also organizing people that are in positions of power.
Yeah.
So if you know a key staff member in an office that's going to help you, that's a tool. That's a person that's in your collective that can push on their behalf, or like win them over. And so being able to say like, oh, you care about children? Well, let me tell you how we can reduce hunger in this state. You know, you care about increasing jobs, right? Like, that's just finding what they already care about and then tying it to your issue in a way that will make them like you. So do you make them like you, or do you make them your enemy, or like, you know, push them and criticize them? Both are effective, because like I said, if that person becomes a big enough nuisance, they're like, okay, I'll just do it. But we always prefer, you know, if they already like us and they want our feedback, they want our input. So we use both strategies depending on what we're talking about and who we're talking about. And sometimes actions can be good and bad. So I'll say a little bit about this chart, and then I'll pass it to you, John.
Okay.
But here we're saying essentially that increasing spending on charitable food would do that much better, like reduce hunger by that much. And then you see how much more it would be if it was an increase in SNAP. But ultimately, increasing wages would have the highest impact on reducing hunger. And you can spin or use this data point in a multitude of ways, right? Like, if you have someone that wants to increase wages already, then you can show them this and say, look how much impact it would be from increasing wages. But if you have someone that's more interested in improving the safety net, then you can say, well, at least increasing the safety net would have this much impact. So just being strategic with which data points, which stories do you use for which speakers. I think even selecting who is the speaker, right? Like, is important. So like, is the person in power going to respond to someone that looks like me, or are they going to respond to someone that looks like Dawn? Being strategic about that, like, who do you have in your collective that can represent the issue, is also important. Dawn?
Yeah, this to me, this is the perfect example of hand holding, because you're gently, passively explaining to your member why your elected person, your elected representative, showing them a graphic is very polite, is sometimes works. Another way of hand holding or pushing, but using a positive message, is, for example, if something was passed that we've really been pushing for, like, for example, Global Food Security Act. If we really lobbied hard and really advocated hard, and our member of Congress was a co-sponsor and got it passed, you would actually write a letter to the editor, which I've done, praising that person, and then they see your name with the thank you, because actually they don't get thanked very much. And that's kind of a hand-holding, kind of pushing as well. You're using a little more honey to get what you want later on.
Cultivating relationships, that's super important.
Yeah.
For all things community organizing. And so this is the part where we also want to make this into an interactive thing. Again, if there's questions, please feel free to send them our way. But we also wanted to give you a specific message to send to your members of Congress right now while we're all together. I'm going to put in the chat these links here. But basically, we have a pre-written message that you can use. You can edit it to your style. But just to start you off on what this looks like, we usually ask people to share a personal story or a story that you've heard that's related to the issue at hand. As Dawn said, writing your name, like letting them know that you are in their district, that you are a constituent. That's the most important thing because that's who they listen to. That's who puts them in office, and so that's who they prioritize. And then you can send them in person, like you can send physical letters, so you can send emails. So in these links, you can get the email address for their office, but you can also get what their physical address is. So I think Dawn is perfectly right. If you write like a handwritten note, put a personal touch in it, right? Like you use colored paper, right? Like if you give them some personality, that all of those things definitely help people read the messages. So I'll put this is the message that we're gonna ask you to send, and then I'm gonna put those links in the chat so that you can find your representatives. That's 2 links, one for the House of Congress and then one for the Senate. And I'll just speak a little bit about the message while you can look that up because it can take a minute or two. But basically right now there's like 12 million children in the United States that are not getting enough food to eat, and they're having a hard time accessing benefits or supports because of all the reasons I mentioned, right? It's time consuming to apply. We want higher benefit levels, right? I think there's a lot of improvements that we can make. So if or you have an opinion, use your own.
Oh, shoot. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Sorry.
You can use the message as written. Sorry, John, and then do we have the extra Google Doc that they can copy and paste the message as well?
I do. It's in the Google Drive.
If you could just drop that link in the chat.
Let me
yes.
Pause my sharing.
Thank you. So we'll put a Google Doc in the chat as well that you can all copy and paste, so you don't have to type all of this on your own. But just wanting to give you the tools that it takes. So, increasing the safety net or wages would prevent diet-related diseases, and would fund, which would allow us to fund other services like, more clinics, more schools, better roads. So we'll also send the recording of this webinar with those resources in the follow-up email. Because I realize we're running out of time, so I do want to open up for questions as well, and appreciate all of you for being here.
I have a question about the conference.
Yeah.
Why did it take so long to have the second one?
That's a good question. I think because people felt like the issue's done. Like some people just don't believe that hunger is a serious issue in the US. And we're here telling you there's like over 12 million, over a dozen million children that are, facing food insecurity. There's like 20 million people throughout the country that are facing this. And so it could, I think that's where you get like a lot of like theories. So for example, like another theory I would throw out there is like, we have more like television, entertainment, right? Like social media, reality TV, but we sort of turned into this culture of like drama, right? Like, here, let me help you, Dawn. We've turned into this this culture of drama. And so like talking about hunger isn't like sexy enough. People don't want to cover like, what you'll get is people will cover food insecurity and like food distributions, right? Like, oh, look at this line of people, getting meals from this, soup kitchen, like groceries, but they won't really go into the depth of like the numbers and like what can, the federal government do. Like they won't take that role as advocates. They sort of take that like, look at the food distribution, like, isn't that great? And we're sort of here like That is great, and we need more. So can you cover the other areas where they're not doing, so there's just a lot of different reasons. But Dawn, do you want to add to that?
I would add that I put the link into the chat for the letter. And I didn't hear the question because I was getting the link. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, I'll repeat it. So I think the question was like, why did it take so long for the second White House conference?
I have a personal opinion on why I think it took so long. And
Yeah.
I think they think it took so long because everybody thought stuff was fine. We had this conference, all of these great programs were implemented. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And people didn't realize that it broke. And I think that's possibly the reason. And then, Jim McGovern just all go no stop decided, you know what, we have to do this.
Yes, exactly. Any other questions? I'm just gonna put this up. This is, if you wanna, talk to us more like offline, this is our contact information, as well as the contact information for our volunteerism department. We have, virtual and in-person opportunities all year round. So just want to make that available to everybody, but also happy to take more questions. I think there's something. Okay. I also know that we're getting to time. So as I said, I think we'll put the link to this recording, as well as the resources to contact your elected officials in a follow-up email. And just appreciate you all for being here the whole time. And thank you for your service. All right. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.